throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger.
The worst disaster in the history of spaceflight. The Space Shuttle Challenger blows apart, killing all 7 people on board.
1 minute, 15 seconds.
NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. Tonight from Washington, D.C. It was a nightmare, a cruel, shocking end to what everyone expected to be another triumph for the Space Shuttle program. The Challenger, with a school teacher and 6 regular astronauts on board, was consumed by a giant fireball explosion less than 2 minutes after it was launched into the bright blue Florida skies at 11:38 Eastern Time this morning. The path to space was filled with debris and with death. All 7 people were killed. High technology, which we take so often for granted, turned on us. It was a tremendous loss, a blow so cruel, so unexpected, we're still trying to deal with it. The victims: Flight Commander Francis Dick Scobie. He had flown in Vietnam, 46 years old. He leaves a wife and 2 children. Navy Commander Michael Smith, the pilot, also a Vietnam veteran, 40 years old, a wife and 3 children. Mission Specialist Ronald McNair, a physicist, was 36 years old. One of 4 blacks in the program. He leaves a wife and 2 children. Lieutenant Colonel Ellison Onizuka was an Air Force test pilot, 39 years old, the first Japanese-American to go into space. He leaves a wife and 2 small children. Electrical engineer Dr. Judith Resnick was 36 years old, a veteran of another space flight. She was single. Payload specialist Gregory Jarvis was an engineer for Hughes Aircraft, 41 years old. He leaves a wife. And the 7th crew member, New Hampshire schoolteacher Krista McAuliffe, 37 years old. She leaves a husband and 2 children. They all died today in the worst accident ever to befall space explorers anywhere. NBC's Dan Molina was covering the launch from the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
It was a bitter cold but sparkling clear morning at Cape Canaveral. Here at the last seconds of the countdown.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
All the communications between the shuttle and mission control indicated everything was going fine. There was a sense of relief that the much-delayed flight was finally underway.
Engines at 65%, 3 engines running normally, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good APUs. Engines throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
It happened just over 1 minute into flight.
1 minute, 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
From mission control, silence. Then the bland, chilling report.
We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded. Flight director confirms that. We are looking at checking with the recovery forces to see what can be done at this point.
Slow motion. A search effort couldn't begin for some 15 minutes after this. Debris, they said, just kept raining from the sky. The head of the Space Shuttle program had no explanations, just sorrow at the tragedy.
At 11:40 a.m. this morning, space program experienced a national tragedy with the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger approximately a minute and a half after launch from here at the Kennedy Space Center.
Computer-enhanced video shows the explosion in detail. One explosion appears to happen at the rear of the spacecraft, around the main engines, perhaps in one of the 2 solid rocket boosters. Then a blast higher up. The shuttle was instantly a blazing fireball. NASA has appointed a committee of top engineers and scientists to investigate the catastrophe. Orders have been issued to impound all records concerning the flight, down to the personal notes of all the flight controllers. Dan Molina, NBC News at the Johnson Space Center, Houston.
And from ground level on Cape Canaveral, today's disaster was witnessed by thousands of people. Among them were space officials, technicians, and the families of the astronauts. Steve Delaney was on the scene to cover the launch for NBC News.
The day began in optimism and high spirits after the frustration of yesterday's scrubbed countdown. As the crew suited up to enter the Challenger, one of the technicians there revived an old schoolboy tradition and brought an apple to the teacher. For the McAuliffe family and the families of the other 6 crew members, this was to be a triumphant day. Grace and Ed Corrigan of Framingham, Massachusetts were in the VIP bleachers along with their daughter Lisa to watch their daughter Krista become the school teacher in space. Their faces mirrored what happened a little more than a minute into the flight.
Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction.
The families have been secluded in the astronauts' quarters at the Space Center since just after the accident. In nearby Titusville, where the manned space program is the economy, the shock hit hard.
I just started crying and backed up and walked away because I knew it was really bad.
I wondered if anybody could be salvaged, you know, from something like that. That was really the first thing that went through my head.
Vice President George Bush arrived here late in the day, heading a delegation bearing the nation's condolences to the families.
You must try to understand that spirit, bravery, and commitment are what make not only the space program, but all of life worthwhile. We must never, as people in our daily lives or as a nation, stop exploring, stop hoping, stop discovering. We must press on.
There was a search in the Atlantic, but the searchers found so little that late in the afternoon, NASA conceded there was no indication of survivors. But that conclusion had been foreshadowed an hour earlier when the flag at the launch site was lowered to half-staff. Steve Delaney, NBC News at the Kennedy Space Center.
NBC science correspondent Robert Bazell has been covering the space shuttle flight since this program began. He's at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena tonight. And Bob, we were talking earlier, you were a friend of Dick Scobie. He had a premonition that something like this would happen someday, didn't he?
That's right, Tom. Dick Scobie worked with us on several of the missions, and in one in particular, I remember him telling me that one of these days the space shuttle was going to blow up. He said it was a large, complex piece of machinery with a lot of explosives, enough to get it going to 17,000 miles an hour to get it into orbit. He said, just like if you've taken enough airplane flights and eventually an airplane is going to crash, he said someday that's going to happen to the space shuttle. And he said, I certainly hope that when that does happen, it doesn't bring the shuttle program to an end.
Well, what about that? Do you think that the shuttle program obviously now has been frozen in place for a time? Do you think that we'll have to re-examine the whole concept of the shuttle?
Well, certainly they're going to have to find out what happened, and until they can allow another shuttle flight to go up, and that is going to bring the entire shuttle program to a halt until they do. Right now they're beginning a process called failure analysis, where they will try in detail, looking at those pictures we've just seen, looking at other pictures, looking at all the data that came from the spacecraft, to try to learn what went wrong, to try, if possible, in some laboratory to recreate the accident. One of the hypotheses, and it's just a hypothesis we've learned, is that a piece of fan in the main engine came apart, a piece of metal, and that flew into the main fuel tank. That's one of the very strong possibilities right now, but as I said, it's only a hypothesis, and it'll take a lot of analysis to find out exactly what the problem was.
Okay, Bob, and that main fuel tank, of course, contains 500,000 gallons of highly volatile liquid oxygen and hydrogen, and so it is an explosive bomb, in effect, that is propelling the shuttle into space. Our coverage of this space shuttle disaster will continue with reports on the men and women who lost their lives today, the reaction of President Reagan, and the school children that Krista McAuliffe left behind.